5, indeed. Mappings and so on. Yeah, so first question is just to do some definitions.
I feel like bijection's got to be in there somewhere.
Not the second bit.
I think that's the second bit, yeah.
So consider mapping phi goes to G1, G2.
It's the linear algebra one.
So at the moment that just looks like a map between sets. So completely general, could be any kind of map between sets. But question 1 is, what condition does phi need to have in order to be called a homomorphism? G1 and G2 groups. So what is it? It is that linear algebra type 1.
Is it like phi of little, yeah, or AB. Let's go with AB. I like AB. That's nice. Is
Equal to
phi of A, phi of B.
Yep.
isn't it also the format of 1,
I would like to see for all AB in G1 here.
Oh yeah, that would be
Stress
nice,
that.
wouldn't it?
And maybe, yeah. Maybe just a little commentary here. So phi preserves the group operation. Or, sorry, maybe a better word is respects the group operations. AB within G1 and phi of A, phi of B within G2. That's important to realize, like the group product here is taking place within G1, group product here is taking place within G2. Okay, so everybody clear, so it's just that, basically that. But if you have this condition here, just, I think that would attract full marks, yeah. All AB G1, 5AB plus 5A plus 5B, that's what we call the homomorphism property. And then the extra conditions needed in order to be called an isomorphism. Within.
What's that word that you've written underneath the scribble?
Respects. But that's not, that's just a bit of commentary on it. Yes. So what are the extra conditions then? So a particularly nice kind of homomorphism is an isomorphism, which means what did you say? Bijective, yeah. So phi is a homomorphism means phi is an isomorphism if it is a homomorphism, although that's implied in the question, if it is a homomorphism and is bijective, i.e. injective and surjective. Those are 1-to-1 onto, of course.
Homomorphism is injective.
No, not necessarily.
So
Homomorphism is just a map that satisfies this for every A. Doesn't have to be injective, doesn't have to be surjective. It might be,
okay.
but there's no conditions on it.
But you're saying phi is isomorphism if it's homomorphism and bijective.
Yeah.
Okay.
So isomorphism, when there's an isomorphism between two groups, it means the two groups are essentially the same as groups or equivalent as groups. So any group property of one is going to be present in the other. subgroups, orders of elements, size of the thing. Any factor group you can do in one group, you can also do a similar thing in the other one. All group stuff will map across under nice groups. Under a homomorphism, group stuff maps across all right, but sometimes it gets collapsed down because it's not injective. And some stuff within G2 will pull back as well. In fact, that's in part 3. So part 2 is an example of this kind of thing. If we assume phi is a homomorphism, so let phi G1 to G2 be a homomorphism. Prove that if G1 is abelian, then so is the image phi of G1. So let G1 be abelian. For our own purposes, just remind ourselves, i.e. that means for all A and B in G1, AB equals BA. That's what it means to be abelian. Yeah. AB equals BA. I would put in this remark here to show you understand that the image G1 is a subgroup of G2. Yeah, it's not essential, but it's just shows you know what the context is. So we've got to show phi of G1 is abelian. So we want to give ourselves 2 elements in phi of G1. And, well, you know what you have to do. You have to somehow be able to prove this.
Why do you say phi of G1 is a subgroup of G2?
I just say it because it's true, and I'm about to look at products of elements within it.
So if phi of G1 is subgroup of G2, can we say phi of G2 is also a subgroup of G1?
No, because phi isn't going in that direction. Phi is going from G1 to G2. You can't necessarily apply phi to G2. Yeah. If phi is bijective, then it would be phi inverse going the other way. Yeah, but not, but you can't apply phi to G2. But the question that asks us to prove that phi of G1 is abelian. So that means we have to be able to show this equality for any xy. And it's going to obviously use the abelian property within G1. Okay. So at the moment here, we've just got elements in G2. So we have to somehow bring the reference back to elements of G1. Okay. But these x and y come from G1. So there exists A and B in G1 such that phi of A is x and phi of B is y. Okay? That's what it means to be in the image phi of G1. X and y arise as values of phi applied to elements from G1. So this can be said to be phi of A times phi of B then. Yeah. So once you see that, and we've just spent the previous question doing the homomorphism property, so you should be using this, yeah, shouldn't you? So phi of A, phi of B can be collapsed to phi of AB. It's by the homomorphism property. And what do we move that to? Phi of BA. Since G1 is abelian. So all products AB can be reversed to BA as the same. So you're still looking at phi of the same thing. And now you just apply the homomorphism property again to expand that out to phi of B, phi of A. Morphism property. And well, that's just yx, and we just declared it there. 5a is x, 5b is y. And that's true for any x and y in 5g1. There's no special restriction on the elements apart from that. So we can declare, therefore, 5g1 is abelian. Okay. It's quite a nice example of having a homomorphism, having a group property in G1, and looking at its consequences in after applying the magnifier. Yeah. So I think something like that would definitely gather all the marks, I think. Many marks going for that? 4 marks. I think we haven't left anything out there, do you think? Any comments or queries on that? Okay. Part 3. Seen that phi is a homomorphism. Okay. Prove that if H is a subgroup of G2, then phi inverse of H is a subgroup of G1. So I just begin with the same declaration. So then now we're letting H be a subgroup of G2. Well, okay, this question is about phi inverse of H, so I would start by just putting down the definition of phi inverse of H. Both to help me in answering it and to demonstrate to the person reading it that you know what you're talking about. Phi inverse of H is the inverse image of H defined by phi inverse of H. So what is it? It's the set of every little element of G1 which is lucky enough to be sent into H. Okay, so it gathers together everything in G1 that gets mapped across and lands inside H. Okay. Everything lands inside G2, of course, but typically H is a subgroup, so H will only be part of G2. So maybe only part of G1 gets maps into H. If we want to show it's a subgroup, so there's various properties of a homomorphism we're going to make use of here. We can put down the argument and then ask ourselves afterwards if we feel we should go and prove those properties that we make use of. And we'll gauge that according to how much time we have and maybe the amount of marks going to the question. But we'll at least clearly state the results we're using. Okay. Now, you want to prove something is a subgroup. So think of the straightforward subgroup here. You've got to show it contains the identity. You've got to show it's closed under multiplication, and it contains all its inverses. Yeah. So is the identity of G1 inside phi inverse of H? So does the identity qualify as an element that gets mapped by phi into H? If so, why? Well, we want to talk about the identities of G1 and G2, respectively. Okay.
G2 must be
Yeah, definitely. So certainly, Certainly E2 is an element of H, as H is a subgroup. G2. Okay, what else? So we want to show that the identity E1 is E1 is the identity we want to show is in phi inverse of H, because this is going to be a subgroup of G1, of course. So yeah, what does phi do to E1? Okay. Well, for any homomorphism phi G1 to G2, we know that phi B1 equals E2. So homomorphism always maps the identity to the identity. The identity in the domain gets mapped to the identity in the codomain. Now that's one of the things that I think I may come back and prove separately. I think probably looking at how it's panning out, I wouldn't require it. But I clearly stated it. So therefore, E1 is an element of phi inverse of H. So the identity E1 here is an element of phi inverse of H. Okay. So the identity is there, so now we need to show closure. There's the identity, closure, inverses, which you have to prove for a subgroup. So now I let, I had A and B in G1 before. So let A and B be in phi inverse of H. You want to show closure. So you need to build an argument that implies that AB is in phi inverse of H. Okay. Always be looking out for the, like I stressed this in number theory. Always be trying to see the argument. You know the beginning of the argument, you know the end of the argument. You just have to join the two together. If you want to see A times B living in phi inverse of H, you have to show that phi of AB is an element of H. It's the definition of the inverse image, isn't it? The inverse image of H consists of everything that gets sent into H. So we have to show that phi of AB is in H. Well, if we want to show that phi of AB is in H, we better work out what phi of AB is. What is phi of AB? Now, there's an automatic move you can make on that all the time. You should just do the homomorphism property. So phi of the product AB is phi of A, phi of B. So it's the homomorphism property. What can we say about that product? It's in H. Why is it in H? Yeah, you see, A and B are in the inverse image. So i.e., that means phi of A and phi of B are both elements of H. That's what it means to be in the inverse image. Yeah. So if they're both elements of H, when you multiply them together, you definitely get an element of H. There's an element of H by the closure property, closure subgroup property of H. Yeah. closure of H giving rise to the closure of the inverse image via the homomorphism. Okay. Lastly, inverses. So now we let A be in by inverse effect, although we've already said that. Let A be
So
in.
how did you just prove that it's phi of AB without H?
Because I re-expressed 5AB as 5A times 5B. That comes from the homomorphism property. But this is a product of these two elements. These two elements are both in H. And H we know is a subgroup. So a product of any two elements from H is in H.
Yeah, but how does that prove that your last argument?
Well, because all I need is that 5AB is in H, so I have it here. 5AB is in H. Yeah? And by definition, that means AB is in the phi inverse of H. Because remember, phi inverse of H is just everything from G1 that gets sent into H. So this demonstrates that A times B is there. And it's there because A and B are there. So that shows the closure. So what we want here, well, we want to know that A inverse is in phi inverse of H. Yeah, that's to show the closure under inverses property. So that means 5A is in H. Say 5A equals H, say. Just to name it.
Part B
No,
now.
we're still proving it's a subgroup. This is, remember, group subgroup, you have to show it has the identity, has to be closed, and has to contain inverses. So I'm just doing the last part.
The first one was what was the top one?
This was closure.
Yeah, and the previous one was
Previous
identity.
one was the identity.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if you want to show the inverse is in phi inverse, that means you want to show phi of A inverse is in H, don't you? That's the definition of being in the inverse image. Show what is phi of A inverse. So
Is it? I don't know.
yeah, go
I
on.
wanna
What did you say?
say.
Say it.
No, I'm worried it's wrong.
No, go on, say it.
Say if it's wrong, it's wrong.
Is it 5A inverse?
It is. So there's an extension. So this is true for homomorphisms. It's an extension of the homomorphism property. That 5A inverse is the inverse of the phi. Okay. So we can quote this again. We can say this is true for any homomorphism. Okay, 5A inverse is always the inverse of 5A. It's an immediate consequence of the homomorphism. So this is equal to C. We've already declared 5A as H, so 5A inverse, the inverse of 5A then is H inverse, which is certainly an element of H, as H is a subgroup. And so has all its inverses, so has inverses for every H in H. So it's the relevant subgroup property of H confers that subgroup property on phi inverse of H through the homomorphism. So in those arguments there, everything is a reference to either a property of the homomorphism, definition of a homomorphism, or one of the aspects of the subgroup property of H. Okay. So that's all of 5A. I would think, looking at that now, that I wouldn't necessarily. At this point, I would go back and start proving these properties I've used. If I had time left at the end of the exam, I'm not thinking about going back and doing it. But I think that's a fair answer for that. Yeah. I mean, if there was an extra direction in the question, provide a proof of any property, homomorphism property that you make use of, something like that. Then you'd have to go and prove these things, prove this, prove the fact that phi, the identity, is the identity. Okay. Any comments on that or questions, related questions? You should understand what's that article in the newspaper today, right? Sitting down. Hastens your end.
That's true.
I was quite sleepy when I came up here, but I'm feeling more
It's
awake.
really warm in here.
It is really warm. Shall I prop the door up?
Might be noisy.
The normals might see it.
Yeah.
Okay. On to part B. Part B is good. We didn't spend a huge amount of time on this stuff.
It's not read it. I don't remember any.
But the
Well, I know I
definitions.
read it and was like, auto what?
Yeah,
Automorphism.
I don't remember that word at all.
Well, in this context, auto is something you do to yourself. So an automorphism is an isomorphism of the group to itself. Yeah. Okay. An isomorphism of the group to itself. Okay. Now, this reveals a lot about the group. Okay. So the non-trivial way, the collection of ways that there are to reassign a group to itself isomorphically reveals a lot about the structure of G. G is a very rich, complicated structure. There could be many different ways of permuting all its elements in such a way to just produce another copy of itself within itself. If G was somehow much more rigid or much more less complicated or less going on, there might be less ways. So the interesting thing is, if you gather together all the automorphisms, they themselves form a group, written as called the automorphism group of G. So what's the operation? Well, it says so. So the operation is the obvious one. If you're looking at a collection of maps G to G, there's really only one obvious way to combine them, is to compose them. Yeah. So you've got two maps G to G, two bijections G to G. You get another bijection when you compose them. Composition of maps. So what do we have to do? Prove that the set is a group. Alt G is a group. Okay, so our claim here is Alt G. It's understood the operation is composition is a group. So I'm just going to proving it's group mode. You know what to do. There's 4 conditions. You got to show binary operations closed. Yeah. There's an identity element. the operation is associative, and there's an inverse for every element. Okay? Classic definition of a group. So first of all, let phi1 and phi2 be elements of the automorphism group. So each of them is a bijective homomorphism, bijective isomorphism. It's not necessary to write this because it's in the question, but each of them is a bijective isomorphism G to G. Okay? So we want to talk about phi1 after phi2. So phi1 composed with phi2. Now we'll allow ourselves to say that this is clearly a bijection. This is just making use of basic properties of maps of sets. That the composition of a bijection is a bijection. So firstly is the observation phi1 after phi2 is a map from G to G. Phi2 takes you from G to G, phi1 takes you from G to G, so you never go anywhere apart from G. Phi1 after 2 is a map from G to G, and this map is a bijection. As, just basically writing out the same thing again. Compositions of bijections are bijections. Okay, but it's not enough to be a bijection. You have to be an isomorphism. So you have to have the homomorphism property. Secondly, phi1 after phi2 has the homomorphism property why does phi1 after phi2 have the homomorphism property? Well, how are we gonna prove it has the homomorphism property? Surely only because phi1 and phi2 have the homomorphism property. That's where it's going to inherit it from. The fact that phi1 and phi2 are homomorphisms is going to imply that the composition is a homomorphism. So, but you know what you have to do because you know what the homomorphism property is. The map applied to the product is the product of the individual map values, function values. So the thing we're going to go from here to here, the justifications are either going to be the definition of what composition means, the homomorphism property of phi2, the homomorphism property of phi1, and unravel to some middle state and then build it back up again to that. You kind of know how it's going to turn out. First, I think, is just to exploit the definition of function composition. Yeah. It's just the definition of composition. Homomorphism property of phi2. Phi1. Homomorphism property of phi2 says this is phi2 of A, phi2 of B. Yeah. So that's true because phi2 is a homomorphism. But now we're looking at phi1 of a product. Phi1 is a homomorphism. So that's just phi1 of phi2 of A times phi1 of phi2 of B. That's true because phi1 are homomorphism. Now I think it's just one step to there again. This first thing, phi1 of phi2 of A, that is the composition of phi1 after phi2 on A. Phi1, phi2, phi B. Phi1, phi2 of B is the composition of phi1 after phi2 of B. So that's by the definition of composition. So we take two automorphisms, phi1 and phi2, the composition is an automorphism. So composition is a closed binary operation. On ought G, the automorphism G. So it's closure, so there should be an identity element. Maybe I'm going to speed up a little bit, or not provide so much detail. I think here we'll just say what it is. The identity element is the identity element of the group. So I'm asking you to name a map. Name a map from G to G.
The one where it just stays the same.
It's got a name.
I think I don't know.
Yeah, that's
The identity.
Is it just called
The identity
diversity?
map from G to G.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just way too
Well, just say the
simple.
identity matrix. The identity matrix has the name identity. It's the same. Yeah. So the identity element of ought G is the identity map. What's known as the identity map. ID from G to G. Defined by X goes to X. The identity. Yeah. As for all, basically for all other maps, for all maps phi G to G, if you compose the identity with phi, you get the same as composing phi with the identity, you just get phi. It's true for all maps from G to G, so it's certainly true for all automorphisms G to G. Yeah. We've done closure, we've done identity element, associativity holds because, are we going to write much for this?
Composition of functions is associative.
We got it first year, didn't we? Associativity holds because composition of any type of functions, as long as you can define the composition, it's going to be associative. Composition of maps is always associative. Okay. Inverses. The inverse element is the inverse map. Yeah. The group inverse element is the inverse map. Phi inverse. This exists because as phi is a bijection, bijections have inverses, and yeah, I think I would just say the inverse of an isomorphism has the homomorphism property as well. Is an isomorphism. The inverse of an isomorphism is an isomorphism. Yeah, that's another thing I'd maybe in two minds. Maybe I would prove that, but probably not. I think the general principle, as long as it's a prior kind of property and it's clearly stated, that should be enough. And its use in this context is shown. That should be enough. Now I might have left mine. So that was B part one. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I just want
Yeah.
Where did you get that X goes from X?
Well, there I was just putting down, this is the definition of the identity.
Right,
I was just pinning it down.
So you're trying to find the identity holds or the.
No. So I wasn't proving anything. I was just making a statement with that. So I think for this, what you have to realize is, so in order to be a group, so this set we're talking about, auto G, this collection of automorphisms of G. In order to be a group, it has to have a group identity element. So there has to be a function from G to G, because that's what auto G is. It's a set of functions from G to G. There has to be a particular function from G to G that acts like the identity element under the operation of composition with any other automorphism. So you're looking for a special function that when you compose it with phi on either side, you just get phi. It doesn't change phi. So the identity has to do nothing. I mean, if it does anything, if it changes anything, it's going to change the values of phi, or change the inputs into phi here. So the identity function does nothing. It leaves everything unchanged. It just sends an input x to the output x.
Thank you.
It's the identity. Part 2. Yeah, I might have time to do this now. So an example, the automorphisms of Z8. Yikes. So Z8 is the integers mod 8 under addition. Classify all Z8 by making use of the classification of finite Abelian groups. First of all is to list the elements.
Would it be alright?
J, the group of automorphisms of
So thinking of automorphisms of this set to itself. So they have to be bijections. But there's a lot of bijections, isn't there, from this set to itself? There's 8 factorial different bijections from this set to itself. So there's a huge amount of maps you're choosing. Of course, most of those are not isomorphisms. Yeah, so to make progress with this, you have to realize something key property of isomorphisms that allows you to identify them and describe the different ones. It's to do with generators. This group Z8 is cyclic. So Z8 is cyclic and can be generated by any of, so what are its generators? Indeed, all the odd numbers. So any of 1, 3, 5, or 7. In general, the additive group Zn has generators if it's any element that's co-prime to n. This came up in an earlier question, remember? You have to prove, so by proving Zn was cyclic or character. Yeah, no, you were asked to prove this in an earlier question on this paper. D is a generator of this if D is co-prime to 8. Okay. So the odd numbers are all co-prime to 8.
I can't remember how we find the generator.
Well, the generators, well, here I was using the result from question 1. Is it question 1? Yes. 2B? Yes, here I'm using the result from 2B. Using the result from 2B. Anything co-prime to 8 the generators. And any isomorphism phi from Z8 to Z8 must send a generator to a generator. Since in general, for an isomorphism, the order of phi of A equals the order of A. Isos preserve order of elements. Remember, the general guiding principle is an isomorphism is a kind of exact replica of the group structure. Okay? So if an element A has a certain order, its image under an isomorphism will have exactly that same order. So the generators are all the ones with order 8, which generate the whole group. But then if you map them under phi, they again have to go to any element of order 8. Moreover, an isomorphism phi is completely determined once we know phi of 1. Why is that? See, 1 is a generator of the domain, Z8. So once you know what phi of 1 is, well, every element in Z8 is a power of 1, or in this case, we're going to use the word multiple because we're in an additive group. So every element in Z8 is a multiple of 1. Phi is a homomorph, it's an isomorphism. So phi of a multiple is just, of 1 is just the multiple of that phi of 1. So once the value phi of 1 is known, phi of n times 1 is equal to n times phi of 1. This is an extension of the homomorphism property for phi. Somewhat confusingly written additively. Additively. Okay, the homomorphism property, we normally, when we wrote it down before, we write it multiplicatively. Equally well, it could be written additively, like the linearity property.
This is the ability to speak here.
So once you know what phi of 1 is, you automatically know what every other phi value is. It's determined by the value of phi of 1 and the homomorphism property. So there are only four automorphisms. Phi 1, which is the identity, and that sends 1 to 1. I'll label them as phi. So there's one called phi 3, that sends 1 to 3. There's one called phi 5, that sends 1 to 5. And there's one called phi 7, that sends 1 to 7. Okay, because the generator has to go to a generator. And once the value on the generator is chosen, all the other values follow. So you got these four automorphisms. I'll deal with the last part. Thursday, we have to determine the isomorphism class of Z8. So which well-known group of order 4? That's the question. We'll have to determine that. Is that 4, did you say?
Yeah, it's not the whole question. I was just like, the first time, the one that gets into the water must Oh, that was fine. Like I didn't There's only 2 options. What it was actually. Oh, it's worth 6 miles.
Yeah, we maybe need to know it's abelian for that. To know there's only 2 options. Did it ask us to prove it's abelian?
I think it says use finite Greek group.
Yeah, using finite Greek groups, yeah. Well, I think we'll argue that or Z8 is billion, and then we can use that.
Yeah.
So it's either going to be Z4 or Z2 plus Z2. So what makes you think it's Z4 instead of Z2 plus Z2?
God. I feel like a vague.
A vague feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Be careful with those vague feelings.
Yeah, but there's like a 50/50. It's gotta be,
Oh, yeah,
it's gotta be,
50/50.
so, you know, if you don't know, you just take a plunge, don't you?
What's just one of the question, how many marks would you have got? And then, if I just,
Yeah.
yes, I get the marks.